The warning didn't come wrapped in fear, drama, or wild predictions. Charlie Munger never operated that way. He didn't shout, he didn't exaggerate, he didn't try to look like a prophet. When he spoke, he simply stated a truth so painfully obvious that most people ignored it. Because accepting it required responsibility, it required discipline, it required facing a reality everyone tries to avoid. Years before 2026, he looked at the numbers and said quietly, "If you're depending on cash, job security, or luck, you're going to lose money. It's baked into the system." Most people over 30 shrugged. Life was busy. Bills were constant. Inflation seemed like someone else's problem. And the idea that a specific year, 2026, could become a financial turning point sounded dramatic, like something you'd hear from a headline chaser, not Charlie Munger. But he wasn't talking about a collapse, not a crash, not an apocalypse. He was talking about mathematics, the kind that doesn't care if you believe in it. If you've crossed 30, you've already entered the stage of life where your decisions compound faster than your mistakes. The world begins taking more from you than it gives. You begin to feel the pressure of time, the shrinking space for error, and the discomfort of realizing that every year you delay, the cost of waiting doubles. Charlie saw something coming that most people would never notice. The subtle, invisible moment when inflation overtakes savings, when wages stop rising, when the price of comfort outpaces the price of labor. It doesn't happen loudly. It happens quietly, slow enough to ignore, fast enough to ruin you. By 2026, he said, millions of people over 30 would be at the crossroads of their financial life, and most wouldn't even know it, because the enemy isn't the economy. The enemy isn't the government. The enemy isn't the stock market. The enemy is the illusion of safety. For decades, the average person was taught a simple formula: work hard, save cash, buy a house, retire at 65. This worked in 1950, barely worked in 1990. It's broken in 2026. Charlie Munger understood this better than anyone alive. He said the biggest financial danger for people over 30 is doing what used to work after the world has changed. And so he warned, not with fear, but with brutal honesty. If you are sitting in cash, you're losing. If you depend only on your job, you're losing. If you ignore inflation, you're losing. And 2026 will expose it. But why 2026? Why that year? What was coming? The answer wasn't dramatic, it was mathematical. The obligations of modern life rise faster than wages. The cost of housing grows faster than savings rates. The return on safe assets barely keeps up with inflation. Meanwhile, the average person, especially after age 30, becomes more cautious, more risk-averse, more tired, and more trapped by routine. Life becomes heavier. Decisions become slower. And without realizing it, the majority walk into a future where being careful becomes expensive. Charlie said, "People don't go broke all at once. They go broke slowly, safely, comfortably." And 2026, he believed, was the year the math would catch up. Inflation in 2021, 2022, and 2023 wasn't temporary, it was cumulative. It didn't vanish just because headlines moved on. It stacked like bricks. A decade of artificially low interest rates had created distortions that would take years to unwind. Housing prices were not returning to 1995 levels. Salaries weren't keeping pace with costs. Basic necessities, food, energy, shelter, were increasing in price faster than almost any financial plan could adjust. By 2026, the compounding effect of these pressures would reach a point where the difference between someone who acted and someone who didn't would be enormous. Charlie once said, "The first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. The second rule is to remember that the world compounds against you too. If you're over 30, you're already in the stage of life where every mistake compounds with interest, and every delay becomes a tax you pay for the rest of your life." This is what most people don't notice. This is what 2026 exposes. Not a crash, a widening gap between those who understood the rules early and those who woke up too late. Charlie believed most people weren't financially failing, they were just slowly drifting in the wrong direction. Here's what he meant. If inflation averages 3-4 per year, as it has, then by 2026, the dollars you saved in 2016 will have lost roughly 30 to 35% of their purchasing power, meaning your rent is higher, your groceries cost more, your insurance has increased, your utilities have doubled, your salary hasn't. So even if nothing in your life changes, your expenses grow while your income barely moves. It's a quiet suffocation. Most people over 30 don't feel it at first. They feel tight, stressed, or like money doesn't go as far, but they don't understand why. They think they're failing. They think they're mismanaging. They think they're unlucky. Charlie said it bluntly, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. He believed 2026 was the year millions would realize the math caught up to them, the year when people would look at their savings and think, why is this not enough? Why am I still struggling? Why does everything feel more expensive? But few would connect the dots. Few would see that inflation had eaten their savings like termites. Few would understand that being too cautious is one of the costliest decisions in adulthood. Most people think the enemy is risk. Charlie taught the truth. The real enemy is not taking the right risks. People over 30 tend to become more conservative. They avoid learning new skills. They avoid investing. They avoid taking small, calculated risks. And by avoiding risk, they take the biggest risk of all, falling behind the pace of inflation. Charlie explained it like this. You can't save your way out of inflation. You must outperform it. This is where 2026 becomes the dividing line, a test, not of intelligence, but of action, of mindset, of adaptability. The world is different now. Costs rise faster. Jobs are less secure. Opportunities reward those who learn, not those who wait. Over 30, the comfort zone becomes a trap disguised as stability. Charlie warned that 2026 would be the moment many finally see that their safe strategy was actually a slow decline in disguise. But he also believed that anyone willing to adapt, even after 30, even after mistakes, could reverse their trajectory. He repeated it often. You don't need to be brilliant. You need to be consistently not stupid. For him, losing money in 2026 meant not inflation, not taxes, not markets, but failing to adapt before the mathematics hits you. He saw it coming. He understood the pressures. He knew the silent traps closing around anyone who waited too long to change, and he left behind the warning. If you're over 30, 2026 will divide two types of people, those who understand how money actually works and those who keep believing the old rules still apply. Charlie Munger always said that the biggest financial disasters don't come from bad investments. They come from misunderstanding the game. And for people over 30, the game changes long before they realize it. The rules that worked in their 20s start quietly failing. The strategies that once felt safe begin to slow them down, and the habits they've relied on for years become anchors instead of engines. He used to describe it with a simple metaphor. When you're young, you're running downhill with the wind at your back. When you're over 30, you're running uphill and the wind changes direction. Most people don't feel the shift right away. It starts subtly. You wake up one day and your rent feels heavier. Your paycheck disappears faster. The savings that once felt like a cushion now look like a single misplaced bill away from disaster. Nothing dramatic has changed, yet everything feels tighter, narrower, more suffocating. This is where Charlie believed the hidden danger lies. People don't know they're behind until they're far behind. And by 2026, he warned, millions of people over 30 would find themselves running uphill without ever noticing the moment the slope changed. It begins with the first trap, the illusion of steady income. Most adults, especially after 30, believe their job is their financial foundation. But Charlie would shake his head at this idea, calling it the most fragile belief of the modern world. Jobs used to be stable. A paycheck used to mean safety. But the economy shifted, technology changed, and companies now restructure faster than employees can plan. A paycheck is no longer security, it is dependency. Charlie said that a job is like standing on a single leg. As long as you balance perfectly, you're fine. But one unexpected push, a recession, layoffs, inflation, personal health issues, and suddenly your entire life collapses because it was balanced on one point. The second trap is even more dangerous, the belief that saving is enough. People over 30 grew up hearing the same advice repeated like scripture: save money, build an emergency fund, avoid risk. It made sense in a world where cash grew, inflation was tiny, and living costs were manageable. But Charlie, well into his 90s, understood something most middle-aged people still struggle to accept. Saving money is not wealth building. Saving money is slowing down how fast you fall behind. Inflation silently eats savings year after year. A dollar saved today will not be a dollar tomorrow. It becomes weaker, thinner, less powerful. And while people cling to the idea that saving more means being responsible, inflation laughs in the background, consuming the very thing they're proud of preserving. Charlie called inflation the invisible tax because it doesn't ask permission, doesn't send warnings, and doesn't care about your age. It especially targets people who think safety comes from stillness. Then comes the third trap, complacency disguised as stability. By 30, most people settle into patterns. They learn one skill, get one job, build one routine, and repeat it for years. Routine becomes safety. Familiarity becomes comfort, and comfort becomes a cage. Charlie warned that the world changes far faster than adults do. Skills that were valuable a decade ago become obsolete. Industries that once looked permanent shrink or disappear. Technology evolves faster than workers can update themselves. And yet, the typical adult clings to familiarity because learning feels exhausting, overwhelming, or intimidating. But as Charlie often said, the world does not reward what used to work. It rewards what works now. He believed that by 2026, the pressure would be undeniable. Jobs that once supported families would barely support individuals. New technologies would outpace old skill sets. Entire industries would shift their foundations. And the people who refuse to adapt, especially those over 30, would feel the ground crumble beneath them. The fourth trap is the hardest pill to swallow: delayed action. Adults tell themselves the same comforting lie: I'll start later. Later when things calm down. Later when life gets easier. Later when bills are paid. When stress fades. When time magically appears. Charlie said later is the most expensive word in the English language. Every year you wait, the cost of catching up doubles. At 20, a mistake is cheap. At 30, it's manageable. At 40, it's devastating. At 50, it's unrecoverable, and yet millions still stand on the sidelines waiting for the perfect moment that never arrives. Charlie believed that people weren't avoiding financial growth because they were lazy or careless. They were avoiding it because they were scared. Fear of doing the wrong thing leads to doing nothing, and doing nothing is the worst financial decision of all. Then comes the fifth trap, dependence on outdated financial rules. Most people over 30 rely on advice given to them by parents or teachers who lived in a completely different financial world. That advice came from a time when money behaved differently, when a single income could support a family, when home prices aligned with wages, when interest rates made saving meaningful, and when inflation was barely noticeable. In 2026, nothing resembles that world, yet people still follow obsolete strategies. Save in cash, depend on one job, avoid investing, pay off everything before building assets, buy a house at any cost, work hard and hope for the best. Charlie believed following old rules in a new world was like using a map from 1950 to navigate a city built in 2026. It doesn't work, and the consequences grow more painful with age, he used to say. If you're over 30 and using a financial strategy from the past, you're not being conservative, you're being reckless. The sixth trap is emotional, the belief that struggle is normal. People over 30 carry responsibilities younger adults don't. Family, aging parents, mortgages, debts, children, obligations, expectations. Life feels heavy. Pressure feels normal. Stress becomes default. And because everyone around them is struggling too, they think struggling is just part of adulthood. But Charlie didn't believe that. He believed that suffering was often a sign of a flawed system, not a flawed person. When adults find themselves exhausted, financially stuck, or constantly worried, they assume the world is unfair. But Charlie saw it differently. He believed the world is simply more complex than the strategies people rely on. And those strategies break under modern pressure. Life gets easier, he said, when you stop playing a losing game. The seventh trap is subtle but deadly, overestimating time. When you're 18, you think you have forever. When you're 25, you still feel ahead. At 30, you believe you have room. At 35, you start to worry. At 40, you panic quietly. At 50, you pretend you're fine. At 60, you realize time ran out decades earlier. Charlie once asked someone, "How old are you?" They said 34. He replied, "Then you have no time to waste. Every decision from here will compound for or against you." He didn't say that to scare people. He said it to wake them up. When you hit your 30s, your financial life is no longer about potential. It's about trajectory. Small habits become long-term outcomes. Missed opportunities become permanent gaps. Ignored risks become future regret. In 2026, those gaps will be clearer than ever. And finally, the eighth trap, the one Charlie believed would hit hardest in 2026, the refusal to adapt. Humans fear change. They cling to what they know. But money doesn't care about your comfort. Inflation doesn't care about your age. Technology doesn't care about your feelings. The market doesn't care about your fear. Charlie believed that the people who will lose in 2026 aren't the poor, the unlucky, or the uneducated. They are the unadaptable. People who refuse to learn, people who refuse to evolve, people who refuse to update their strategy, people who cling to safety even as it destroys them. He used to say, the moment you stop learning, you start losing, and the losses compound faster than you think. This is why he warned that 2026 would be a defining year, not because of a crash, but because of clarity, a year when millions will finally understand why they feel stuck, why money slips through their fingers, why their efforts don't match their outcomes, a year when people over 30 will see the real cost of the traps they've been living in, a year when the consequences of delayed change will be impossible to ignore. Charlie never said this to terrify people. He said it to prepare them, because he also believed something hopeful. If you recognize the traps, you can escape them. If you understand the rules, you can play better. If you adapt, you can win. Even after 30, even after setbacks, even after years of mistakes. 2026 isn't the end. It's the moment the fog lifts, the moment the truth becomes undeniable, the moment you either rise with the new rules or get crushed by the old ones. And Charlie Munger wanted you to be on the right side of that moment. Charlie Munger often said that people don't fail because of ignorance. They fail because of misjudgment. And for those over 30, misjudgment becomes expensive in a way younger people never experience. By this stage of life, mistakes are tied to mortgages, careers, partners, children, aging parents, bills, responsibilities, and commitments that cannot simply be reset or undone. And yet, despite the weight of these obligations, most financial decisions people make after 30 are built on assumptions, habits, and mental shortcuts that Charlie spent a lifetime warning against. He believed that the biggest financial losses never appear suddenly. They start quietly. They begin with how people think. And if the thinking is flawed, the money follows the same path, slowly drifting toward loss, invisibly deteriorating until one day the problem becomes undeniable. He called it the silent drift because most adults have no idea it's happening. Part 3 focuses on this drift, the psychological traps that cause people to lose money without even noticing. Charlie believed this was the real enemy in 2026, not the economy or the market or the government, but the mind itself. And he spent decades explaining how small mental errors compound the same way interest does, except in the opposite direction. The first psychological trap is denial. Charlie observed that humans are naturally allergic to uncomfortable truths, so they create illusions that protect them emotionally, illusions that feel comforting but destroy long-term financial freedom. A person over 30 might know deep down that they aren't saving enough, aren't learning new skills, aren't investing, aren't improving, aren't adapting, but the mind whispers reassuring lies. It's fine, I'll fix it later. Things will improve on their own. Charlie said this is how smart people end up poor, not because they lacked ability, but because they avoided reality for too long. The second trap is overconfidence, especially after 30. By this age, people have accumulated experience, which gives them the dangerous illusion that they understand how the world works. They confuse routine with expertise, repetition with mastery. A person who has been at a job for 10 years believes they understand their industry deeply, when in reality they might have simply repeated the same year 10 times. Charlie warned that the most dangerous words a person can say after 30 are, "I already know." In finance, knowing is never enough. The world changes too fast. Markets evolve. Economies shift. Old strategies die. New ones emerge. Yet millions of adults rely on outdated playbooks because they mistake familiarity for wisdom. The third trap is loss aversion. Charlie referenced this constantly. Humans hate losing far more than they love winning. It's emotional, irrational, and baked deep into our evolution. In financial life, this fear leads people to avoid investing, avoid risk, avoid learning, and avoid taking steps that create long-term freedom. People cling to cash because it feels safe, even as inflation destroys it. They avoid investing because it feels scary, even though not investing guarantees long-term loss. They choose the predictable path even when it leads nowhere, simply because the unknown feels worse. Charlie said this fear keeps millions stuck in a life they secretly want to leave. The fourth trap is comfort addiction. Charlie believed this was the main reason adults fail. Comfort feels harmless, but it slowly drains ambition, focus, and progress. The more comfortable a person gets, the less urgent their goals feel. People tell themselves they're tired or busy, when the truth is simpler. They're comfortable enough to avoid growth, but not comfortable enough to feel fulfilled. Charlie described it as the slow death of potential. Comfort blinds people to danger. Comfort sedates the mind. Comfort convinces you tomorrow will be easier than today. Adults over 30 fall into this trap more easily than anyone else. Why? Because routine becomes their anchor and their prison. The fifth trap is comparison. Charlie thought this was poison for the mind. Instead of focusing on their own financial path, adults compare themselves to coworkers, neighbors, classmates, relatives, or influencers they see online, and comparison leads to terrible decisions. Trying to buy a house before they're ready, upgrading lifestyle too quickly, forcing financial milestones they can't sustain, saving less because everyone else is also struggling, chasing investments they don't understand. Comparison distorts judgment, and distorted judgment leads to financial collapse. Charlie often said, the easiest way to be miserable is to compare. The easiest way to go broke is to compare financially. The sixth trap is short-term thinking, something Charlie despised. He believed that human brains are wired for immediate gratification, making long-term planning feel unnatural. And after 30, this becomes even more dangerous because every short-term decision has long-lasting consequences. A decade of not investing, a decade of not learning new skills, a decade of overspending, a decade of doing just enough. People reach 40 and suddenly realize the last 10 years slipped through their fingers, and trying to fix 10 years of inaction in 2 years is impossible. The math doesn't allow it. Charlie emphasized repeatedly, long-term thinking is a superpower. Most people don't have it. That's why most people lose. The seventh trap is status pressure. After 30, people feel judged more heavily. They feel pressured to appear successful. They want to prove that their life is on track. And this pressure leads to expensive decisions with zero long-term value. New cars, fancy weddings, bigger apartments, designer clothes, lifestyle upgrades, constant social spending. Charlie believed that people go broke trying to look successful instead of trying to be successful. He put it bluntly. If you spend money to impress people, you lose money twice. Once when you spend it, and again when you realize nobody cares. The eighth trap is emotional decision-making. People over 30 often carry more emotional weight: stress, fear, regret, pressure, exhaustion. And when emotions control financial decisions, the results are disastrous. Charlie always warned that the brain works poorly under emotional strain. A stressed mind makes impulsive investments. A fearful mind stays stuck in inaction. A desperate mind looks for shortcuts and scams. An angry mind blames the world instead of adapting. To Charlie, money wasn't just math, it was psychology, and most people lose not because they miscalculate, but because they misreact. The ninth trap is ignoring compounding, the very force Charlie built his life around. People understand compounding intellectually, but they fail to apply it. They underestimate how quickly small habits turn into massive outcomes, both positive and negative. Not investing compounds into regret. Delaying growth compounds into loss. Staying in the wrong job compounds into years of missed opportunity. Charlie saw compounding as a law of nature. Whatever you do consistently becomes your destiny. And the 10th trap, the one Charlie called the great destroyer, is ego. Ego convinces people they don't need help. Ego prevents them from admitting mistakes. Ego stops them from learning new skills. Ego keeps them trapped in old beliefs. Ego tells them they're doing fine when they're slowly falling behind. Charlie believed ego was the biggest financial liability a person could carry after 30 because ego blocks growth, and growth is the only path to survival in a changing world. By 2026, Charlie believed these psychological traps would collide with economic reality, and the people who haven't studied their own mind, their biases, their habits, their fears, will be caught unprepared. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked awareness. Not because they failed to work hard, but because they failed to think clearly. Charlie always said, your mind is the captain of your financial life. If the captain is asleep, it doesn't matter how strong the ship is, it will drift until it crashes. And part 3 is the moment when the audience realizes this truth fully. You cannot change your financial future until you understand the psychological traps controlling your present. Charlie Munger spent his entire life studying why people fail financially, not just during crashes, recessions, or crises, but in ordinary years, during ordinary times, while living ordinary lives. He believed that people lose money not because the world is unfair, but because their thinking is undisciplined. In his view, the path to survival, especially after age 30, depended on how individuals prepared mentally and strategically before the storm arrives. And in this final part, the most important truth emerges. 2026 will not destroy everyone. It will only destroy the unprepared. Charlie always emphasized a single phrase, unless. It was his way of saying that catastrophic outcomes are not destiny, they are avoidable, predictable, preventable. Most people fall behind financially, but not because economic forces are unbeatable. They fall behind because they never adopt the mindset that protects them. Charlie believed that if a person corrected their thinking, their habits, and their behavior, they could escape the fate that traps millions. This part explores that escape, the shift in perspective that allows someone over 30 to rise while others sink. The first transformation begins with brutal realism. Charlie's philosophy never promised comfort. It promised clarity. He believed that people must look directly at their financial reality without sugarcoating or fantasy. Before 2026, this means evaluating your income, spending, savings, skills, debt, and investments with total honesty. No excuses, no hopeful projections, no future me will fix it. Charlie always said, you don't solve problems by denying them, you solve them by confronting them early. And this is where the unless begins. Unless you face the truth now, the truth will face you later, and by then it will be too late. The second transformation is simplifying decisions. Charlie believed that complexity destroys results. He warned adults over 30 about the danger of overthinking, second-guessing, bouncing between strategies, or chasing the newest thing. Complexity leads to paralysis. Paralysis leads to inaction. And inaction in a world of inflation equals loss. He famously said, take the big, simple ideas and take them seriously. A person preparing for 2026 doesn't need 50 strategies. They need 4. A productive career skill, a simple long-term investment plan, a disciplined savings habit, and a mindset of constant learning. When most people drown in overthinking, the prepared survive by doing what Charlie did. Focus on what works. Ignore the rest. The third transformation is developing adaptability. Adults over 30 often become rigid. They cling to routine, they fear change, they resist learning. But the world does not care about comfort, it evolves. New industries rise, old ones fade. Skills become outdated. Opportunities shift. Technology transforms everything. Charlie believed that adaptability, not intelligence, determines survival. He said the world changes. If you don't adapt, you lose. 2026 will reward those who evolve and punish those who cling to the past, the person who updates their skills, changes careers when necessary, learns continuously and stays open-minded will thrive. The person who insists on doing things the old way will struggle. The fourth transformation is understanding opportunity cost. Charlie considered this one of the most important ideas in all finance. Every dollar you keep in cash has an opportunity cost. Every year you delay investing has an opportunity cost. Every hour spent on distractions instead of learning has an opportunity cost. He believed that most people over 30 ignore this invisible cost, and it destroys their future. To avoid losing money in 2026, a person must begin asking the question Charlie asked every day. What is the next best use of my time, money, and energy? This single question separates winners from losers because it forces rational decision-making. The fifth transformation is overcoming emotional decision-making. Charlie didn't believe in being fearless. He believed in being unemotional. He said emotions are the enemy of good judgment. When people panic, they sell at the bottom. When they get greedy, they buy at the top. When they compare themselves to others, they overspend. When they fear loss, they miss opportunities. To avoid losing money in 2026, a person must detach their emotions from their actions. Charlie often said, temperament is more important than intellect. And temperament is learned through discipline, delayed gratification, long-term focus, resistance to envy, patience during volatility, calm thinking under stress. While the world reacts, the prepared observe. While the world panics, the prepared stay steady. And this alone sets them apart. The sixth transformation is mastering your personal financial runway. Charlie believed deeply that freedom comes from controlling your burn rate, the speed at which your money disappears, even if income fluctuates, even if markets crash. A person with a long runway has time to think, adapt, pivot, and grow. A runway is built through savings, low expenses, backup income skills, small emergency buffers, and eliminating unnecessary debts, he said. The first rule of compounding, never interrupt it unnecessarily. And nothing interrupts compounding faster than lifestyle inflation. People preparing for 2026 focus on financial resilience, not appearance. They choose stability over status, flexibility over luxury, value over vanity. They build a life where surprises do not destroy them. The seventh transformation is investing in your own earning power. Charlie believed the highest return asset in the world wasn't a stock, a bond, or a property. It was a person's own mind. He said, your best investment is always yourself. Someone over 30 cannot control the stock market. They cannot control inflation. They cannot control recessions. But they can control how skilled they are, how valuable they become, how competitive their career remains, and how adaptable their knowledge stays. A person preparing for 2026 invests in courses, books, certifications, new abilities, and better thinking. These improvements compound faster than money ever will. The eighth transformation is building anti-fragility. Charlie didn't believe in simply surviving hardship. He believed in becoming stronger because of hardship. Anti-fragility means designing a life where volatility helps you rather than harms you. An anti-fragile person has multiple skills instead of one, has passive income instead of depending on one job, has emergency savings instead of debt, has investments that grow over decades, has a mind trained to stay calm when others panic, has a structure that benefits from long-term growth. The fragile person collapses under pressure. The average person survives pressure. The anti-fragile person grows from pressure. Charlie wanted people to become the ninth transformation is avoiding stupidity, which Charlie believed was far easier and more reliable than trying to behave brilliantly. He said repeatedly, it is remarkable how much long-term advantage people like us have gotten by trying to be consistently not stupid. In preparing for 2026, this means avoiding common traps. Don't carry high-interest debt. Don't chase quick riches. Don't speculate on things you don't understand. Don and follow the crowd. Don't let emotions dictate investments. Don't interrupt compounding. Avoiding stupidity is more powerful than chasing genius. And finally, the 10th transformation, and the core of the unless, is adopting a rational long-term mindset. Charlie believed that rationality is the greatest financial superpower. Rational people avoid envy. Rational people stay patient. Rational people plan ahead. Rational people ignore noise. Rational people adapt when needed. Rational people learn from mistakes without letting them define their identity. He often said, any year that you don't destroy yourself is a good year. A rational person rarely experiences financial disaster. An irrational person experiences it repeatedly. This is the difference between those who lose money in 2026 and those who don't. In the end, Charlie Munger's warning was not a prediction of doom. It was a prediction of division between those who continue drifting through life on autopilot and those who take control of their thinking before the world forces them to. The unprepared will lose money. The unthinking will lose money. The emotionally driven will lose money. The status-obsessed will lose money. The rigid, the fearful, the comfort-addicted, they will all lose. But those who adopt Charlie's mental models, clarify their thinking, improve their skills, simplify their strategy, and confront reality will not only survive 2026, they will use it as an inflection point. The world doesn't punish everyone. It punishes the unprepared. It punishes the irrational. It punishes the complacent. And Charlie's entire message condensed into one sentence is this: everyone will lose money in 2026 unless they think differently